In the quiet town of Bridgeton, Sheriff Tom Hollis spots a young black girl, Ammani, alone at the laundromat every night. Her mysterious presence stirs his cop instincts. What's she hiding? Why is she always alone? And how will Tom solve this mystery and protect her? Hey everyone, welcome to Worldly Whispers. Let's get started. In the small, sleepy town of Bridgeton, the nights were usually as quiet as the town itself. Sheriff Tom Hollis, a 53-year-old man burdened with a tragic past, had made the night shift his regular duty for the past 5 years. His colleagues were more than happy to let him have it, as they had families to return to during the day. For Tom, the night was a sanctuary, a time when he could be alone with his thoughts and avoid the memories that haunted him in the daylight. Tom sat in his patrol car on the edge of Main Street, his hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his blue eyes, though tired, scanned the empty streets with alertness. Every now and then, his eyes would drift to the small photo on his dashboard, a picture of his wife Sarah and daughter Emily, who had been taken from him in a car accident 7 years ago. He quickly averted his eyes, focusing on the present. As the clock on his dashboard ticked towards 11:30 p.m., Tom started his engine and began his nightly route. He drove slowly down Main Street, passing the closed storefronts and darkened windows. The only signs of life were the 24-hour diner at the corner and the laundromat a few blocks down. It was as he passed the laundromat that something caught his attention. A small figure, barely visible in the dim lights spilling from the laundromat's windows, was making its way towards the entrance. To his surprise, it was a young black girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old. Her hair was pulled back in neat braids, and she wore a faded blue jacket that was a size too big for her. In her arms, she carried a small bag filled with clothes. Tom frowned, his cop instincts kicking in. What was a child doing out this late at night, alone and at a laundromat of all places? He watched as the girl disappeared inside, the door swinging shut behind her. For a moment, he considered going in to check on her, but then he shook his head. She must be there with a parent, he thought. Perhaps they were just running late with the laundry. It wasn't his place to interfere in every little thing he saw. However, as he drove away, Tom couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. The sight of that little girl, all alone in the night, stirred memories he'd rather keep buried. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on the quiet streets ahead of him. It was probably nothing, he told himself, just a trick of the light or his imagination playing tricks on him. But the next few nights, the same thing happened. Every time Tom passed the laundromat, he saw the same little girl, always alone, always at the same time, always carrying that small bag of clothes. She would come from around the corner of the laundromat, making it difficult for Tom to see exactly where she was coming from. At first, Tom tried to brush it off. Maybe her parents worked nights, and this was the only time they could do laundry. Maybe she just liked helping out. But as the nights went on, and he never saw an adult with her, his curiosity began to grow. He started paying more attention, adjusting his route so he'd pass by the laundromat more frequently. The girl's routine never changed. She'd arrive just before midnight, slip into the laundromat, and stay for hours. Tom would see her through the windows, sometimes methodically sorting clothes, waiting patiently by the machines, and folding each item with care. It was on the 5th night that Tom finally admitted to himself that something wasn't right. He pulled his car over across the street from the laundromat and watched as the girl made her way inside. This time, he noticed details he'd missed before. The way her clothes hung loosely on her small frame, the careful way she walked as if trying not to draw attention to herself, and the quick, nervous glances she cast around before entering the building. Tom felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't just a kid helping with chores. This was something else entirely. As he sat there, wrestling with his thoughts, he overheard 2 women walking past his car. They were talking about the little girl, saying that she was there every night like clockwork, and that it wasn't right for a child to be out at this hour. Their words lingered in Tom's mind. He wasn't the only one who'd noticed. The town was starting to talk, and people were getting concerned. Tom knew he couldn't just ignore it any longer. Something was going on with this child, and, as the sheriff, it was his duty to find out what. He decided to keep a closer eye on the situation, gather more information, and then decide on the best course of action. Little did he know that this seemingly insignificant moment would be the beginning of a mystery that would change his life forever. The following night, Sheriff Tom Hollis was determined to get some answers. He timed his arrival at the laundromat to coincide with the young girl's usual appearance. As he parked his patrol car in front of the laundromat, he saw her small figure approaching from around the corner, just as he expected. Tom watched intently as she entered the laundromat. Taking a deep breath, he decided that the direct approach was the best way to handle this situation. After all, he was the sheriff, and it was his responsibility to ensure the safety of every resident in town, especially children. He stepped out of his car, straightened his uniform, and adjusted his hat, aiming to look official yet not intimidating. As he entered the laundromat, the bell above the door chimed softly. Inside, it was nearly empty, save for an older man dozing in a chair in the corner and the little girl. She was already busy loading clothes into a washing machine. Tom's footsteps echoed in the quiet space as he made his way over to her. Up close, he could see the frayed edges of her jacket and the scuff marks on her shoes. She looked even smaller than he had thought. "Hello there," Tom said, keeping his voice gentle. The girl froze for a moment, then slowly turned to face him. Her large, dark eyes met his briefly before darting away. She didn't respond, just stood there, her small hands clutching a t-shirt. Tom crouched down to bring himself to her eye level. "I'm Sheriff Hollis," he said, tapping the badge on his chest. "What's your name?" The girl's eyes flicked to his badge and then back to his face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she took a small step back, putting the washing machine between them. Tom's heart ached at her obvious fear. Just as he was about to try again, the bell above the door chimed once more. A black woman entered, carrying a large basket of laundry. "Hey, Ammani," the woman called out as she made her way to an empty machine. The girl, Ammani, gave a shy wave and a quiet hi in response. Tom stood up, a sense of relief washing over him. This must be Ammani's mother, he thought. Surely, there was a simple explanation for all of this. The woman nodded politely to Tom as she passed, and then began loading her laundry. Tom watched as Ammani quickly moved away from him, going to another machine in the corner of the room. She kept her head down, focused intently on her task. Tom hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. His instincts told him that there was still something off about the situation, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe Ammani was just shy around strangers. Maybe her mother trusted her to do the laundry alone sometimes. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't necessarily a cause for alarm. Deciding it was best not to push the issue right then, Tom gave a final glance around the laundromat. Ammani was now sitting on a bench, her legs swinging as she watched the washing machine spin. The woman who had greeted her was engrossed in a magazine she'd pulled from her purse. With a small sigh, Tom made his way back to the door. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. But what could he do? He had no evidence that anything was wrong, just a nagging feeling in his gut. As he climbed back into his patrol car, Tom's eyes were drawn to the photo on his dashboard. Emily's smiling face looked back at him, and for a moment, he saw Ammani's face superimposed over his daughter's. Both little girls, both vulnerable in their own ways. Tom started the engine, his mind racing. He had thought this visit would put his concerns to rest, but instead, it had only deepened them. As he pulled away from the curb, he made a mental note to keep a closer eye on the laundromat in the coming nights. Something told him this mystery was far from solved. The next morning, Tom was at his desk, surrounded by papers. He had spent most of the night digging into records, trying to find any information he could about Ammani or her family. But as the sun rose, casting long shadows across his cluttered desk, Tom had to admit that he had come up empty-handed. There was no record of an Ammani matching her description in the local school system, and no address listed under that name. It was as if the girl simply didn't exist on paper. Frustration gnawed at Tom as he rubbed his tired eyes. How was it possible that a child could be so completely off the grid in a town as small as Bridgeton? Everyone knew everyone else, or at least he had thought they did. Determined not to give up, Tom decided to take a different approach. If official records weren't giving him answers, maybe the townspeople would. He spent the next few days talking to residents, especially those who lived near the laundromat or frequented it regularly. The responses he got were a mixed bag. Some people had noticed Ammani, expressing concern about seeing such a young child out late at night. Others hadn't paid much attention, assuming she must be there with family. But no one seemed to know who she was or where she came from. One conversation in particular stuck with Tom. It was with Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment above the laundromat. She had been doing her laundry late one night when she'd spotted Ammani. "Poor little thing looked so tired," Mrs. Johnson had said, her wrinkled face creased with worry. I offered her a cookie, but she just shook her head and went back to folding her clothes. "It's not right, Sheriff. A child that age should be home in bed, not doing laundry at midnight." Tom couldn't help but agree. With each passing day, his concern for Ammani grew. He found himself driving by the laundromat more and more frequently, always hoping to catch a glimpse of her to reassure himself that she was okay. But Ammani remained an enigma. She appeared like clockwork each night, did her laundry with quiet efficiency, and then disappeared into the darkness. Tom never saw where she came from or where she went. It was as if she materialized out of thin air, existing only within the confines of the laundromat. As the days turned into weeks, Tom felt a growing sense of responsibility towards Ammani. He couldn't explain it, but something about her struck a chord deep within him. Maybe it was the memory of his own daughter, or maybe it was simply his instinct as a protector. Whatever the reason, he knew he couldn't let this go. The mystery of Ammani had become more than just a case to solve. It had become a mission, a purpose that filled the empty spaces in Tom's life for the first time in years. He felt truly invested in something beyond his nightly patrols. But with this new-found sense of purpose came a heavy weight of responsibility. Tom knew that if Ammani was indeed in trouble, every day that he didn't take action could be putting her at risk. The thought kept him up at night, haunting his dreams when he did manage to sleep. One night, as Tom patrolled past the laundromat, he saw Ammani again. This time, he decided to confront her directly. But as soon as Ammani noticed Tom entering the laundromat, a look of extreme fear took over her face. In a split second, she grabbed her backpack, stuffed the clothes she was folding into it haphazardly, and rushed towards the door. Tom was startled by her sudden flight. "Ammani, stop," he shouted, but she was already out of the door. The chime of the doorbell echoed in the empty laundromat. Without hesitation, Tom dashed outside. He caught a quick glimpse of her small figure turning the corner of the laundromat and disappearing into the night. Filled with worry, Tom started chasing her. They ran through the quiet, dimly lit streets of Bridgeton. Despite her small size, Ammani was incredibly fast, zigzagging between parked cars and slipping through narrow alleys. As they neared the edge of town, Tom realized she was making for the old cemetery. Its iron gate stood ajar, looking menacing in the moonlight. Ammani squeezed through a gap in the cemetery fence and vanished among the headstones. Tom paused for a moment at the fence. The cemetery at night was a place of darkness and hidden dangers. But the thought of leaving Ammani alone spurred him on. He pushed through the gap and entered the cemetery. The darkness was thick, and the moon, covered by clouds, offered only faint light. Tom strained his eyes and ears, calling out, "Ammani, I'm here to help you." But there was no answer. He walked deeper into the cemetery, his feet catching on roots and his uniform getting caught on branches. With every step, his anxiety grew. Where could she be? How could a little girl disappear so completely? After searching for what felt like hours, checking behind every large headstone and in every shadowy corner, Tom had to admit defeat. He returned to the cemetery entrance, his mind filled with dreadful thoughts. What if Ammani was hurt? What if someone else found her before he did? As he left the cemetery, a feeling of failure overwhelmed him. He had been so close to reaching her, and now she was gone, perhaps in more danger than ever. Tom walked back to his patrol car with slumped shoulders. But as he sat in the driver's seat, he made a firm decision. He would not give up. He would find Ammani. Tomorrow, he would double his efforts. He was determined to leave no stone unturned in his search for her. The next evening, Tom arrived at the laundromat early. He waited, eyes fixed on the entrance. After last night's events, he was a mix of worried and determined. As time passed, and Ammani didn't show up, his anxiety grew. What if she never came back? What if he had scared her away for good? Just when he was about to lose hope, he saw Ammani's small figure approaching. She looked around nervously before entering the laundromat. Tom watched through the window as she started her usual routine. But she seemed different this time, more subdued, and her movements were slower. Finally, when it was midnight and Ammani was the only one left in the laundromat, Tom gathered his courage and entered. The door chime made Ammani look up, her eyes wide with fear. Tom quickly held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Ammani, I just want to talk. I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. Ammani hesitated, but then nodded slightly. Tom walked closer. As he got near, he noticed her red, rimmed, and puffy eyes, as if she had been crying. "Ammani, I'm really worried about you. Can you tell me why you're here alone every night?" he asked gently. Before Ammani could answer, Tom saw how tired she was. Her eyelids were drooping, and her body was swaying. Suddenly, Ammani's legs gave way, and she slumped onto a bench. She curled up, using her backpack as a pillow, and fell asleep right away. The sight broke Tom's heart. It was clear that Ammani had no other place to go. She had been using the laundromat as a place to sleep. Tom couldn't hold back his tears. He thought of his own daughter, Emily, and how she used to sleep safely in her bed. Here was Ammani, a little girl forced to sleep on a hard bench in a laundromat. Tom sat on the floor next to the bench, watching over Ammani as she slept. In that moment, he made a solemn promise. He would do everything in his power to help Ammani. He would ensure she never had to endure such a lonely and difficult life again. As the early sunlight filtered into the laundromat, Ammani woke up. Tom, who had dozed off nearby, roused immediately. Ammani's eyes widened in fear when she saw Tom. She clutched her backpack tightly, her body tense for flight. "Ammani, it's okay. You're safe with me," Tom said softly. His voice was rough from the long, sleepless night. Slowly, Ammani's grip on the backpack loosened a bit, though she remained silent and watchful. Tom knew he had to approach the situation carefully. "Ammani, I'm here to help. Can you tell me where your parents are?" he asked gently. At the mention of parents, Ammani's lower lip trembled. "Mom got sick and she died," she whispered. "It was a long time ago. We came from Haiti for a better life, but then she got really sick." Tom's heart ached. "What about your dad or other family?" he probed. Ammani shook her head. "It was just me and Mom. After she died, I didn't know what to do. I was scared people would send me back, so I hid and found places to sleep." The laundromat was warm at night. Tom was stunned by her story. "Ammani, you've been so brave, but you don't have to be alone anymore. I want to help you. Will you let me?" he said. Ammani looked at him intently, her eyes searching his face. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked. Tom took a deep breath. "Because I had a little girl too, named Emily. If she were in trouble, I want someone to help her, just like I want to help you," he explained. A glimmer of hope appeared in Ammani's eyes at his words. "What will happen to me?" she asked, her voice small. Tom replied, "First, we'll get you breakfast, then go to the police station to figure out how to keep you safe. How does that sound?" Ammani hesitated, then nodded. "Okay," she murmured. During the drive to the police station, Ammani sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her backpack. Tom glanced at her in the rear view mirror, still processing the situation. When they arrived, Ammani tensed up again. "It's okay. We're just going to talk and find a way to help you," Tom reassured her. In his office at the station, Tom asked Ammani to sit. She perched on the edge of the chair, her backpack in front of her like a shield. Tom sat down across from her. "Ammani, can you tell me more about your mom? When did she get sick?" he asked. Ammani's eyes dropped to the floor. "We came here, and then she started coughing a lot. She couldn't work. We lost our apartment and stayed in shelters. Then she got really bad and went to the hospital. She never came back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Monica Dawson from Child Protective Services entered. "Sheriff Hollis, we got your call about a child in need," she said. Tom introduced her to Ammani. "Ammani, Miss Dawson is here to help us. Is it okay if she asks you some questions?" Ammani nodded reluctantly. As Miss Dawson began interviewing Ammani, Tom watched closely. At first, Ammani was guarded, giving short answers. But as the conversation went on, she opened up a bit, especially when talking about her life in Haiti. Tom listened, his heart heavy with her story. Suddenly, Tom had an epiphany. "Miss Dawson, can we talk privately for a moment?" he asked. Outside the office, he said, "I want to become Ammani's foster parent, with the intention to adopt. I know it's sudden, but I feel I'm meant to give her a home." Miss Dawson was surprised. "Sheriff Hollis, that's a big decision. Are you sure?" Tom nodded firmly. "I've never been more sure. Ammani deserves a real family and a chance at a normal life. I'll do whatever it takes." Miss Dawson smiled. "Well, it's not a typical case, but but I can see your dedication. We can start the process right away. There'll be a lot of paperwork and home visits." Back in the office, Tom crouched beside Ammani. "Ammani, how would you feel about coming to live with me? Maybe forever?" he asked. Ammani's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really? You want me?" she asked. Tom's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Ammani. I want you to be part of my family." Ammani stared at him for a moment. Then, a slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile Tom had seen from her. In that instant, Tom knew their lives were about to change irrevocably. After Tom decided to foster and adopt Ammani, he was swamped with the adoption process. There was a large amount of paperwork to fill out, background checks to pass, and home visits to prepare for. However, his determination never faltered. Due to his position as sheriff and the urgency of Ammani's situation, he got temporary custody while the formal procedures were in progress. During a home visit, Sarah Thompson, Ammani's social worker, came. In the living room, Sarah tried to talk to Ammani. "Ammani, how are things going?" Sarah asked gently. Ammani looked at Tom nervously. Tom nodded to encourage her. "It's different now, in a good way, but it's hard to talk about the past," Ammani said, fidgeting with her shirt. Sarah then asked about the changes since living with Tom. Ammani's face lit up. "I'm not always scared anymore. I have a rail bed, and Sheriff Tom got me a blanket with butterflies," she said. She also mentioned the pancakes on Saturdays and bedtime stories. Tom realized these small things meant a lot to Ammani. Sarah asked how Ammani felt about the new life. "Safe and happy," Ammani replied. When asked about the future, Ammani was excited about painting her room yellow. As the conversation ended, Sarah told Ammani that Tom wanted to give her a permanent home. Ammani looked at Tom with hope. Tom knelt and told her he would love and protect her. Ammani agreed to the idea. In the months that followed, there were tough times. Ammani had nightmares and moments of fear, but gradually, she became more confident. Finally, the adoption hearing day arrived. Tom and Ammani stood in the courthouse, waiting nervously. The judge approved the adoption, and they became a legal family. Everyone applauded, and they hugged, filled with joy. After leaving the courthouse, when Tom asked how to celebrate, Ammani surprisingly wanted to go to the laundromat. She said it was where their family journey began, and she wanted to remember it as a happy place. In the laundromat, they sat on the bench where Tom first found Ammani. Tom said it used to be a place of sadness, but now it was a symbol of hope. As time passed, Tom noticed a change in himself. The long, lasting grief started to fade. One morning, he decided to take Ammani to the cemetery to introduce her to his late wife and daughter. Ammani agreed to go and bring flowers. At the cemetery, Tom introduced Ammani to Sarah and Emily. Ammani placed flowers on the graves and promised to take care of Tom. Tom felt a sense of peace, and he knew his past and present had finally come together. From then on, every Saturday, they would go to the laundromat. It wasn't for laundry, but to remember their beginning. As they sat on the bench, they cherished their family, formed by love and through hardships.
If this story touched you, show your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing memorable stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.